a good morning to everyone and afternoon, depending on where you're listening from. Just one sec. Let me share screen. Okay. Kiran, let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, great. All right. Let me just move this away. Now, thank you, everyone. Today, I will be speaking on hidden persuasions, analyzing bias in international negotiation text with AI. My name is Oluwole Fagbohun. I'm the founder of Readrly, and you're welcome again to the third webinar on AI and data science. And in this discourse, we will look at the introduction. We'll talk about understanding bias in AI, bias in international negotiation texts. We would also look at the role of AI in analyzing negotiation text. We also then go further to look at a case study where AI is applied to diplomatic negotiations. We'll talk about the challenges and ethical considerations, future direction, and we'll close with a conclusion and a Q&A where you can ask me questions based on our discourse. Now, AI, as we know it, is being increasingly used in processing textual data, and diplomatic data, diplomatic negotiations are no different. We would look at understanding bias in these negotiations, which are crucial to ensure fairness in international negotiations and agreements. So our objective is to look at how AI-driven tools, especially large language models now, can detect and analyze bias in negotiation text. And we'll look at the ethical implications, regulatory landscape of bias in AI, particularly in terms of international policy making. A useful reference is to look at is, I think I've attached some references that would help if you want to further drill down into these discussions. So let's go further. Now, in terms of bias in AI, AI bias refers to a systematic error that can result in unfair or prejudiced outcome, often reflecting societal inequalities. When we look at AI, bias can emanate from three different ways. One, data. Two, algorithm. Three, human. When it happens because of the data, it means because maybe perhaps we're training with a data that is not representative. So it's skewed towards a particular maybe country, organization, ethnic group, or race. When it comes to algorithmic bias, if we design models that are primed towards I think they're primed towards like promoting or favoring one side, or especially when we talk about like negotiation text, maybe favoring powerful nations due to reference to past treaties over developing countries. That can be a problem in itself. Then human bias can be introduced by either developers or everyday users, where we kind of where implicit cultural assumptions are embedded in AI-powered diplomatic tools. So if where humans interpret text, our bias can be emanating from where we come from, or based on also maybe perhaps our religious beliefs or traditional opinions, as it may be. Now, cognitive bias in negotiations. Some of the biases which have been found in international negotiation text have to do with things like, for example, framing effects. The way information is presented to you can impact on how you would perceive the information presented. Cultural biases can also play a key role because there are differences in language and communication styles, which can also lead to misunderstanding. Then power asymmetry. Larger countries are more assertive in their discussions in these kind of international negotiations compared to smaller or developing countries who do not have the same kind of strength. Now, the impact of this bias is that it can distort perception. It can lead to unequal treaties or unfair trade deals. An example is if we when we use which we would look at in when we look at the case study, is AI analysis of past negotiations has shown that developing countries concerns being downplayed. Their concerns are being downplayed in things like climate agreement. Like if you were familiar with maybe perhaps not COP28, where loss and damage was being discussed, and developing countries did not actually get the benefits of which they asked for because of the damages done by climate change to developing countries based on the actions of countries who were emitting more carbon. Now, the role of AI in analyzing negotiation text. AI has been able to, because of we have now more powerful models like LLMs, they're able to objectively extract insights into from things like linguistic framing, hidden power dynamics, and rhetoric strategies which are used in negotiation text. NLP, when you use NLP techniques, you are able to apply methods like sentiment analysis, topic modeling, bias detection. Sentiment analysis can help you identify the tone, emotion, and bias in diplomatic discourse, Topic modeling can help you to aggregate group discussion themes, which we would see in the case study and how it would impact on the discourse and find and be able to help us to understand and extract bias that exists in this text. Then bias detection is helps you to be able to find patterns in linguistic favoritism or hidden agendas which are being expressed in negotiation text or statements. Some of the key techniques that are being used now, transformer-based models can be applied, and aspect-based sentiments can help identify persuasive intent in speeches. A very good paper I also have attached here is Saville et al., which talks about conversational persuasiveness of large language models. It's a good paper to look at for further reading. Now, let's look at this. The case study we are looking at is going to talk about more of AI in diplomatic negotiations, and it will look at how we can use NLP techniques to be able to track persuasive techniques, persuasion techniques, and reveal hidden biases in international discourse. Now, diplomatic negotiations are quite different from everyday conversations because they do have inherent complex and they also involve strategic linguistic framing. There is also the use of implicit persuasion tactics and power asymmetry between negotiating parties. Again, you would find that there is the application of subtle rhetoric techniques which could influence the outcome of these discussions. In this case study, we look at some of the historical diplomatic texts that were being analyzed, which includes the United Nations resolution, World Trade Organization's trade negotiations, bilateral and multilateral treaties, climate agreements, peace negotiations, and conflict resolution documents. Now, AI-powered persuasion tracking can help with many things, which include one of them is framing effects. And framing effects is the way which an issue is being presented to shape your perception. So let's look at an example. When you look at negative framing, you would see, for example, a text could read like something like this. Developing countries are refusing to comply with fair trade regulations. Now, this statement is framed in a negative way, which portrays developing countries as obstructive in nature. On the flip side, we can also frame this statement to sound like this, where you say developing countries need more time to adapt to global trade standards. In this particular scenario, we are framing it in a positive way where it presents developing countries as countries that are in need of support. So negotiators can use either of these framing techniques depending on their power play and the strengths and what they try, their overall strategy that they want to use to achieve their goal in diplomatic negotiations. Next, there is the use of power language where you can either be assertive or they can either use hedging or assertive statements. Now, powerful nations usually would come from a point of using assertive language to impose their position, while weaker nations would prefer to use hedging statements to maintain a bit of flexibility. Hedging statements could look like something like this, where all nations must eliminate subsidies by 2026 to ensure fair competition. Now, this includes a strict deadline, and these are the kind of statements you would expect from major power players in trade negotiations. While on the flip side, developing countries could use statements like countries should gradually phase out subsidies where possible. This introduces some form of ambiguity, so that would also delay compliance. And this can also apply to things like climate conferences where oil-producing countries would probably use more hedging statements, and those against oil-producing countries would use more assertive statements to be able to buttress their points and push their agenda forward. Another another use case you can find is strategic emotional appeal. And these references are made to historical injustice, moral arguments, ethical responsibilities. You would find negotiators use statements like this. For example, they may want to make a humanitarian appeal where you can use statements like millions of displaced families need shelter. We cannot turn our backs on them in their time of greatest need. Now, the impact of this is basically to push forward an emotional argument that will most likely increase the public and political support for accepting refugees. Another tact that you can find when you use AI-powered persuasion tracking is repetition and reinforcement. Now, repeating a message increases the likelihood of acceptance and influence. So you would find in trade negotiation deals, which take place over a period of days, where a reinforcement strategy can look like this, where you can say maybe on day one, you would find that there's a free trade statements like free trade leads to prosperity. Day three can have statements like history shows that free trade strengthens economies. And on day five, all studies confirm that free trade is the key to economic growth. So when we use techniques like topic modeling, we can extract these recurring patterns that can show that repetition and reinforcement would make it more acceptable to other negotiators, and that can cement the narrative to in their counterparts' minds. Agenda setting and omission bias. So this is another technique that is being used by negotiators, so where negotiators can control an agenda by highlighting or ignoring issues. You would find, for example, in the EU migration talks, what was highlighted was we need to strengthen border security to ensure stability. And what was ignored was the root cause of migration, such as economic disparity and climate change. Now, the impact of this is negotiators are able to push forward the agenda while skipping or omitting other issues that they do not want to bring to the fore. So this is some of the issues that can be identified by when you use AI-powered negotiation tracking. Now, some of the key findings that was discovered in when we track negotiations in international when we track linguistic hidden influences and linguistic shifts in negotiation text is you would find that AI models are able to reveal several key insights which you would find in this text. And let's look at some of them right now. Power asymmetry and power dynamics and asymmetry, strategic positioning for demand, and language of cooperation and control. So the tone, you would find that AI is able to detect linguistic tone. So it can identify when a developed country is speaking versus when a developing country is speaking because of the use of either assertive or non-assertive tones. So this is one of the ways that you can find, you can also, AI can detect the speaker or in a particular negotiation text. Now, strategic positioning, where negotiators are able to, because these negotiations, they're kind of very dynamic. So you may want to soften your position just so that you can appeal to others, where you can change, maybe perhaps instead of using compliance, you can change it to where you can make it an offer such that it can be appealing to the general public. Again, you can also look at things like language of cooperation rather than versus control. So major power players would look at international policies in ways that suggest that it's of mutual benefit to everyone. But what they skip to talk about is the fact that these policies are in favor of their own particular interest. An example will be when you look at things like climate negotiations, countries with high emissions would like to push the agenda that technology sharing agreements rather than talk about carbon reduction commitments. Again, you can detect strategic linguistic shifts used to manipulate the discourse. So when you can soften resistance through technology change, sometimes when you look at these long-term or climate discussions or even negotiation discussions across different diplomatic discourse, you will find that they might use rigid terminologies are replaced with a more subtle language. So that, for example, you could replace sanctions are often can be rebranded as economic adjustment mechanism, so that it will sound less punitive and more acceptable to their colleagues and the wider public. Then, if you another tact that is found is gradual normalization of policy position. So when, for example, if a controversial policy is introduced in the early stage of negotiations, the fact that it's continuously repeated over time makes it more palatable, and when you combine that with softened resistance through the change of technologies, and that would actually make it more acceptable because of the fact that it's continuously being reinforced and is being reframed in a way that is more acceptable to their colleagues and the general public as well. Now, again, another part, something we could also look at is how these technologies are being portrayed. So, if to both internal and external bodies, when they have internal discussions between stakeholders, it can be framed as negotiations where there's a back and forth, and both sides will have to make concessions. When it's being presented to external audiences, for example, the general public, it can be framed as economic partnership. So this would help to increase public acceptance of these policy changes, and it would reduce and also reduce adversary to these changes. One real world example that was examined was the application of AI in AI models to analyze the EU's trade agreement, and you would find that it was predominantly you will find key terms predominant in these policy in these trade agreements. Terms like partnership, cooperation, mutual benefits were used increasingly, and you would find that it toned down the use of things like trade concessions and tariffs. So these linguistic shifts helps government to justify their policy change to the public while minimizing resistance from the general public. Now, how can AI help negotiators to counter biased arguments? So, the three key ways it can do that, which we've identified, is enhancing transparency, enabling real-time argument analysis, and helping weaker negotiators to recognize power plays. By transparency, you can use AI to highlight strategic language used to help negotiators identify hidden biases in arguments. So a country might claim a deal is fair, but when we use AI to analyze the deal, you can see that there's an uneven burden sharing by both parties in that particular agreement. Real-time argument analysis, you can use AI during live negotiations to evaluate the persuasiveness and the framing of statements. You can use AI to get instant feedback on whether a phrase is loaded with implicit bias or manipulative language, or even, you're leaving out some key information just to be able to promote a particular agenda or purpose. And it can also help smaller nations with fewer resources. We can use AI to be able to support their decision-making process. That can help them to counterbalance more powerful negotiators. So in this case study, we've looked at how AI can help to be able to uncover hidden persuasion tactics in international negotiations. It can help us to track and quantify these techniques like linguistic framing, bias in text, and strategic persuasions, which negotiators use to get a critical advantage, in ensuring a more fairer and more balanced agreement. So AI's role in diplomacy, it can be used to uncover hidden power asymmetries in negotiation. You could use it to track strategic language shifts that manipulate the discourse, quantify subtle persuasion tactics for improved transparency, and empower negotiators to counter biased arguments effectively. Now, Matt et al. Is a fantastic paper to be able to drill down further into this discourse and get more insights into the discussion we're having now. So some of the challenges and ethical consideration is because of the nature of these discussions, sensitive negotiation data raises concerns of confidentiality. Again, algorithmic transparency is important. We need to understand how AI comes to a conclusion that maybe a text is biased or not. So explainability would help stakeholders to understand how AI thinks and presents this information forward to everyone. Some of the mitigation strategies we could consider is bias audits. There's a need for regular model evaluations to be able to ensure fairness, and also inclusive data practices, ensuring that our data that we are training our models with are diverse and balanced, so that can also promote fairness in terms of mitigation strategies as well. For future directions, I believe that developing more AI models that can interpret contextual and cultural nuance and also capture cultural nuances would really help to be able to improve how we are able to interpret international agreements. Policy implications, if we establish international AI governance framework to ensure fairer negotiation processes, this would also help both developed and developing countries to be able to pinpoint issues in international negotiation texts. So our key takeaways is that AI is able to reveal hidden biases in negotiation text, and this can lead to fairer diplomatic engagements. Ethical and legal AI governance frameworks are important to ensure the responsible use of AI. So my call to action today is basically that collaborators, there should be an increased collaboration between AI researchers, policymakers, diplomats to create an equitable AI-driven negotiation tool that would help to improve fairer and more balanced negotiations in international agreements. Thank you for listening to me. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. Thank you for your time. Yes, please.
All right, thank you so much. In fact, I have my pen and paper, and I've learned a whole lot and jotted down some things. So, and I want to believe that this is a recent development, and I love your call to action on this. It's just that sometimes some of the projects I work on, I don't have power over continuity. And I remember working on something like this in 2020, but just to ask if there's anything that has been done in this. So one of the on international negotiation, one of the challenges or one of the things we spotted out is on power dynamics mixed reading.
Yeah.
Because in international negotiation, who speaks first, pauses, or remains silent can indicate power positioning. So this particular project, we are working on a transcript, or we're trying to transcribe meetings, and it was between a Chinese delegate and an American delegate. And Chinese delegate, they'll deliberately remain silent after a proposal. And that is a common negotiation tactic to create pressure. Now, the AI text analysis that we built rather captures this as a behavioral reading and fails to recognize that silence as a strategic move and reports no major objection, which was one of our failures in that model. So now what I'm trying to ask is, based on the recent issue, can AI now accurately dictate and interpret cultural nuances, power dynamics, or unspoken strategies in international negotiation? Or will it always be limited by its training data and biases? Do we
Okay,
have
yeah.
anything else on that?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and I'm happy that you're coming from a place of you've actually carried out some research on this as well. Now, if you look at the current models that are being made, and I think they're constantly being improved. So, say for example, your data will play a key role in all this because if your data does not capture the way, for example, I'll use an example, the Chinese delegate, how the implication of their silence, because if it's not able to understand that when an argument is presented forward. Again, I think I covered that as well, where you find out that some of the insights which are being presented are being skipped intentionally because they do not want to touch on those insights. They do not want to discuss that. So that in itself, if you use a model that is being trained to capture that cultural nuance, that to show that the Chinese delegation, they do not speak about these issues because they do not want to talk about it and to continuously hold on to the power dynamics rather than to just because if they present their opinion about it, that might lead to a broader or a further discussions and will not lead to an end to that agreement. So what they would do is basically skip that. So the models that that are being used currently, if you use a model that is generally trained on maybe data that is developed in the West, it may not capture effectively how the reactions of the Chinese delegation. So you must use a more balanced model with diverse data set trained to imply that when the delegate from the Chinese government refuses to speak, it means that they want to withhold their own approach and ensure that you do not get the insights or the kind of answers that you require. So it's an approach and it's a tack that actually is being picked up because silence does not necessarily mean acceptance. And LLMs now are able to pick that if you really train them correctly. I hope that helps in some way.
So do you have any GitHub account you can reference for me to try to look at that, where they've built in cultural nuances or how
So
to build
what
such?
we do, I think what we did is we applied of unfortunately we've not published that the model it's not open source, it's mixture of experts, so we basically use multiple models from different trained on different data so in terms of analyzing negotiations, so that what we've done is we use for developing countries like maybe the African continent and Nigeria and South Africa use low resource models which have captured like the cultural essence and essence of the people. Then for developed countries you use more open source out of the box, open AI, GPT-4, and Cloud Sonnet. There's also a couple of models from the Asian continent that captures the Chinese and the Japanese way of presenting information. So when you combine all these experts, they're able to capture these different cultural nuances. Can they be better? Absolutely, yes. And I'm sure that I'm not right now, I'm not aware if anyone has open source something like that, but I think we will do that where once we finish publishing our paper and presenting our insights, we definitely open source the model so people can see how they are able to interact with this text and how they're able to extract these various insights across various international discourse.
I mean, to be honest, if you have a waiting list, I don't mind being on the waiting list to read the paper and also to explore the model because I'm curious about how subtle and non-verbal negotiation tactics are captured in the model. Since you cited Chinese, for example, that you have that model, because most of it are we work with Chinese negotiations on a higher tactical level.
Yeah, we use it for the recent COP29. We collected about 30,000 data decision documents from COP29, and we've used that to be able to analyze that. So that was like the basis upon which this talk was developed, you know. So and that led to okay, let's look at other international negotiation agreements and peace treaties, you know. So yes, I would definitely keep you in the know as soon as we publish it and have the model available as well.
Okay, that's fine. I'll reach out to you again.
All right.
On that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay, if there are no questions, you can connect with me using my LinkedIn and let's stay in touch. Thank you everyone for listening to me. And yeah, that's it for me.